President of the European Parliament, Vice President of the Commission, distinguished leaders of the political groups, members of the Parliament, my fellow Europeans. Firstly, let me express my appreciation for all the efforts and the work during this electoral period and the progress that you have achieved for Europe and us all. But of course, my focus today will not be on our past, but on our future. I believe that we must step up to defend our fundamental values in the European Union. And the most strategic way to fight the forces that challenge those values is to deliver results in the areas of employment, security, migration, climate change, and thus to create hope for the future. So that should be our core missions, the defense of our democratic values and our young people's dream. There are people that say that idealism is the preserve of the young, and that when we enter into the world of adults, we learn that nothing is black and white, and realize that self-interest and cynical trade-off rules the world. I believe that that narrative is wrong. My parents took me in as a foster child. They taught me about shared responsibility, about respect for every human being, about solidarity. And during my both trade union and political life as an adult, I have had to compromise and make tough decisions in difficult situations, such as economic downturns, but also terror attacks. That has not made me forget my values. It has only deepened my belief in the importance of having a moral compass to guide you through these tough times. Because if we didn't let our values steer our decisions, if we didn't feel that our choices were leading us towards the kind of society we believe in, what would be the point in making decisions at all? Now, the same applies to the European Union. Our union is based on values. The whole idea of creating a common market and joint responsibility for coal and steel production was to tie our countries and the people closer together. We wanted to fulfill Friedrich Schiller's sentiments in Ode of Joy, that alle Menschen werden Brüder, with equal rights, equal value, and which, put to the music of Beethoven, became our common anthem. And now that our union has grown in size and has grown older as well, we, just like the individual, need to remember our most fundamental values. For what would be the ultimate point of our work, the ultimate point of our union, if we did not promote the values that we believe in? And this, my friends, may also be the best thing we can do for the world. We are living in a time when the multilateral system is being shaken to its core. The United Kingdom wants to leave our union. The transatlantic link is being questioned. Meanwhile, China is on the rise, and several economies in Southeast Asia and Africa are ready to follow in its footsteps and redraw the entire global economic map. And at the same time, Russia is acting in a revanchist manner in flagrant contempt of international law. So now more than ever, it is time to stand up for common, principle-based solutions and a world order where might does not come before right. But the EU can only be a strong voice for democracy in the world if all of us member states stand up for the principles of democracy also at home. We can only be a credible actor in the Middle East if we fight anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in our own countries. We can only be a force for free media and the rule of law in our neighborhood if we have a free media and independent courts in our union. For every democratic principle that is weakened in the EU's voice in the world will be equally weakened. And therefore, the EU must stand up for our fundamental values, both externally in our world, but also, of course, internally in our union. And this is more than about our place in the world. This is about the whole future of our cooperation. If the principles contained in our most fundamental contracts are not adhered to, how are we then to trust other agreements on the single market, on free movement, everything that does so much for our prosperity? If our promises to each other are to be trusted, if our cooperation and our economy are to continue to grow, then pacta sunt servanda must apply to the most fundamental contracts of all. And therefore, Sweden will work to defend the EU's core values in the budget negotiations, in our support of the Commission's work. And my government will propose to the Swedish Parliament that Sweden will join the European Public Prosecutor's Office to contribute in the fight against corruption and the embezzlement of EU funds. We support also the Belgian proposal, or something similar, to establish an EU mechanism for the peer review of adherence to the rule of law. And I will devote my efforts in Europe to defending the values that I have borne since my childhood, of the equal value of all people and of solidarity. I will give my all, side by side with so many of you, to refute and fight the extremist forces who deny these values, and those forces that are doing everything they can to tear apart the union that defend them. And of course, EU is a compromise, probably one of the most successful compromises in world history. But there can be no compromising on human dignity. There is no reasonable level of anti-Semitism, no acceptable level of racism, no tolerable level of misogyny or homophobia. Never will we compromise on these values. The defense of democracy is also the defense of young people's dreams. Is there anything more dangerous to a society than its young people ceasing to dream? It is in societies that have lost hope that both political and religious extremism can grow the strongest. And this is not only crucial in the fight against extremism, but also in the work to uphold a broad popular support for our union. I believe it is crucial for all of us in the current Brexit negotiations, for example, that the UK and the EU have the ability to move on as friends and create a close, strong and long-term relationship. But the only way for the EU to avoid similar exit ordeals in the future is to constantly prove its worth to people's everyday lives and to their dreams for the future. And that is why the EU should not only benefit the market, but preferably benefit its people. It is also why the work for a larger market can also be the work for a stronger democracy, if that can create jobs and hope for our young people. Over the past 2 years, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and I have co-chaired a global commission on the future of work for the International Labour Organization. And there is no doubt that in the future, work will be more advanced, more automized, more digitized, and that demand for skilled workers will soar. And this is good news for EU. We benefit from a global competition that is based on knowledge rather than lower wages. But we cannot rest on our laurels because everyone wants to be in the same position. China has long been educating more engineers than the United States, Germany, and Japan put together. So in this respect, our European cooperation will have an incredibly important role to play in the creation and sharing of world-leading knowledge and innovation. And there are always many competing interests in budget negotiations. You know that better than most. But my country has learned that the very hard way, that it is only with strict policy priorities and a budget that is under control that democracy actually can deliver in the long term and with stability. And that is why, given all the competing interests, we do not propose a larger budget, but rather the stronger prioritization of innovation, new jobs, the digital, educational, and physical infrastructure required to make them possible. It is our responsibility for our young people's dreams to take advantage of this opportunity. Our solution can never be to lower wages or raise protectionist walls. We should not shut ourselves off from the world. We should lead it. Now, therefore, I am proud also that young people now in Tallinn or in Bratislava can listen to hip-hop from Paris or fado from Lisbon on Spotify from Stockholm. But I also know how hard Spotify had to work to get launched in Europe. Compare that to a startup company in Silicon Valley that can launch a product on the US market and reach more than 320 million people immediately. So our only chance of competing with this is to make it just as easy to reach all the citizens in the European Union at the same time. And believe me, anyone who has lived through a dark Nordic winter knows that we can not compete with California when it comes to weather. For generations, people from our continent have traveled across the Atlantic in search of a better life. But the young geniuses and IT geniuses of today and the future should not have to go west or east, for that matter, to realize their dreams. They should be able to do so here in Europe, in a digital market open to everyone. Friends, it is now almost a treat to visit the European Commission website and see that one priority policy area is the European Pillar of Social Rights. Of course, my pride is not diminished when I also says that we launched this work in the Swedish city of Gothenburg. Now, I'm grateful to President Juncker, the Commission, to the European Parliament, to the member states in the Council for all of our work to create a social pillar and establish 20 key principles that strengthen the social rights of all the citizens of Europe. But no worker will or should thank us unless these 20 principles also become a reality across the EU. Until we stand up for collective agreements and fair wages, until we put a stop to rule breaking and tax fraud, until we secure gender equality and women's right to a full wage, a career without glass ceilings, and the freedom to decide of their own lives. Now, for this very same reason, Sweden will actively promote new free trade agreements because we know how many jobs these agreements can create. But all these agreements should also be favorable to people as well as to the market. The agreements must respect our environment, our health, and the rights of workers. And there is an enormous potential for the European services market if it's opened up and shaped with concern for social rights. The EU labour market must be defined by all of the positive freedoms: the freedom of study abroad, learn languages, work throughout Europe, but never the freedom to set workers against workers. Our common labour market should not crush workers' dreams, it should fulfill them. I know that if you are to have hope in the future, you must also feel safe here and now. ISIS and terrorism are dreadful security threats that must be dealt with together. But unfortunately, that's not the only challenge that we have. I recently met the leadership of Europol at their headquarters in The Hague and their virtual command post. Europol has done an amazing job, not least breaking up and arresting pedophile networks. This type of crime, every nation and nation's police service can see their part, but we can only see the whole and crush it in cooperation with others. A single nation would not, even if it really wanted to, even if it poured in resources, be able to solve that alone. So Europe is borderless for criminals as well. They read up the European laws, looking for the weakest national legislation and for the new national markets to enter. And that is why Sweden wants to deepen European efforts to fight organized crime as well as cyber threats. We want to strengthen our cooperation on security and defense, increase our ability to implement joint civilian and military crisis management operations, and have a European Union that cooperates with strategic partners and builds security together. I also know that there is a broad agreement in this Parliament and on this continent that the EU must never again lose control in the way it did during the refugee crisis. Chaotic migration affects the confidence of the whole of society in the reception of refugees, but it affects the refugees themselves worst of all. The only ones who benefit are right-wing extremists who are able to use the situation to inflame hatred of migrants. The EU's free movement of people requires shared external borders and a shared responsibility for orderly and regulated migration built on three pillars. Firstly, strong cooperation with countries outside the EU so that fewer people are displaced and more people can have better living conditions so that new migration crises can be reduced or prevented entirely. Secondly, the control of all external border, which is now taking place through the strengthening of Frontex, creating greater security and saving lives. Thirdly, the fair distribution of those who arrive and whose grounds for asylum are to be examined, with that work carried out as a shared responsibility by all member states. It should not be possible to benefit from all of the advantages of the Schengen cooperation and then refuse to share the responsibility for its maintenance. And we have, in this respect, a huge task ahead of us. Sweden will do its best to support the completion of that task, and I'm under no illusion that it will be simple. But if we fail to deliver, the Schengen Agreement will be weakened. And in the long run, so will the entire European Union. So it's time now to step up for orderly and regulated migration in Europe. It is in the best interest of us all. Dear friends, as Swedes, we are often asked, do you know ABBA? Do you know Zlatan Ibrahimovic? Now we're getting ready for a new question. Do you know Greta Thunberg? We're proud of the demonstrations that she has inspired, which gathered over 1 million young people all over the world. But one thing we must never forget in their message is the following. It is not up to their generation to solve the climate crisis. It is up to us, all generations, here and now. And Sweden is ready to be in the lead of that work and show what is possible. We have a climate framework for our society which will lead our efforts to cut emissions quickly and powerfully and achieve net zero emissions by 2045. But it's us, together, that must implement the Paris Agreement without any ifs, without any buts, without maybes, in order to keep the global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees. And as part of this work, the EU needs to adopt a goal of net zero emissions by 2050 at the very latest. And this is also a great opportunity for European industry, as a whole world is crying out for new solutions. So this is not only the right thing to do morally, it is the smart thing to do economically, and it is crucial to our survival. To conclude, Mr. President, this is what I want to say to you today. Idealism is not only the preserve of the young. Our common values have been the basis for the EU's fantastic history, and they must guide us now so that we can have an even brighter future. And in these times when people say that the EU must prove its worth, there is no better task for our union than defending our democratic values and by delivering on jobs, security, migration and climate change, defending the dreams of our young people. An EU that can deliver this not only gains greater legitimacy, but also a stronger voice in our world. It is indeed a difficult task, but that is why it's so alluring, and that is why it's so perfect for us. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. Thank you for your speech, for your proposal on the future of the European Union and your engagement. Now we need to close the electronic registration for the Catch the Eye. The next speaker is the Vice President of the European Commission, Mr. Valdis Dombrovskis. You have the floor.
Honourable President Tajani, Honourable Prime Minister Löfven, honourable members. It's a great pleasure to represent President Juncker in this debate on the future of our Union with Prime Minister Löfven. At the start of next year, we will celebrate 25 years of Sweden taking its rightful place at the heart of our Union. In this time, Sweden has brought so much to the European Union, from its rich culture to its unique social model. In many ways, a Swedish way of doing things has become both an example and a guide for our future. Sweden is a country that does more than simple talk about European values. It puts them right at the heart of its society through its strong social protection and high-quality education and healthcare for all. And it is a country that always looks forward. For instance, Sweden was one of the first countries to pass a climate act with an explicit goal of being carbon neutral by 2045. It is also well ahead of the curve when it comes to embracing a new digital world. Stockholm is now home to more 1 billion plus companies, or so-called unicorns, per capita anywhere in the EU, the most important tech hub of this kind outside the Silicon Valley. We can learn from all of this. But as we look forward, there is another Swedish concept that I believe should be central to the future of our Union. For many Swedes, lagom is a lifestyle and a habit of mind. It is a Swedish philosophy of moderation and balance, of avoiding both excess and extreme. And for many, it is a secret of a balanced, sustainable and happy life. As we look to our future, Europe should inspire itself from lagom to find the right balance for all of its member states and all of its citizens. It means focusing on the things that matter most to Europeans and doing less elsewhere. It means tackling the big issues by being open to compromise and find balanced solutions to common challenges. In this spirit, I want to commend the Prime Minister and all of Sweden for the way they responded to the migration crisis in 2015. And ever since, it has been leading efforts on a long-term and comprehensive reform of our asylum system so that it offers the protections for those who need so. The solution we need must balance solidarity and responsibility. The Commission has put the package of asylum reform on the table, and Europeans now expect their leaders to make real progress. And we count on Sweden to continue leading those efforts. Sweden has also been at the forefront of efforts to make our Union more socially fair for all, an issue which is a second nature to your country. I want to thank the Prime Minister and for his personal leadership on the European Pillar of Social Rights, launched by President Juncker in Gothenburg in 2017. It is a shared and future-proof commitment to support a fairer and more equal society across Europe. Once again, it's about finding the right balance. This is, of course, mainly a national competence, and the EU does not interfere with the crucial role played by the social partners. But there is a lot we can do together, and thanks to the social pillar we already have. We have ensured equal pay for equal work in the same place. In recent months, we have agreed new rules to improve work-life balance for parents and carers. We have agreed to set up a European Labour Authority to make the labour market fairer and support the 17 million Europeans who work in another member state. And we are investing in skills to help people get on the job market or find new opportunities in today's rapidly changing world of work. Honourable members, when it comes to the future of our Union, there is no more important priority than the fight against climate change. Millions of young Europeans in Europe and growingly beyond Europe are marching. Politicians, at least European politicians, are listening to the young people. They tell us that every year of their lives has been one of the warmest recorded. Indeed, 17 out of 18 hottest years on record all occurred in this century. And we see with our own eyes the damage that this is causing. We saw devastating forest fires and hugely costly droughts in Sweden and elsewhere last summer. And just recently we had another tragic reminder of this in Mozambique, Malawi and Zimbabwe. Sadly, this is not a freak event or a one-off. By 2050, climate change could force more than 10% of the global population to flee their homes. The world needs to respond, and Europe needs to continue leading the way. We did that with the Paris Agreement, which we are implementing at home and helping others to do the same right across the world. For example, the European Commission has already proposed to devote a quarter of the EU's budget to climate-related action as of 2021. But public finance alone will not be enough to meet our ambitious climate and energy targets by 2030. The financial sector needs to play its part in the fight against climate change. This is why we put forward an action plan on sustainable finance to incentivise private capital to flow towards green projects. And we immediately followed up with 3 legislative proposals, 2 of which have already been agreed at EU level. But fighting climate change takes more than targets, and it will not stop in 2030. We must look further ahead. This is why the Commission has set a long-term strategy to be climate neutral by 2050. According to our estimates, this would lead to clean technology solutions and boost our GDP by up to 2% and take off as much as 3 trillion euros from our energy import bill while ensuring a just and socially balanced transition for all. It is good for people and it's good for the economy. And for me, that is what European leadership looks like in the 21st century. The world expects, and we must deliver. This is why we have focused our proposals for the new multi-annual financial framework on areas where European action can have the biggest impact. To respond to the future challenges, the Commission has proposed a modest increase in our long-term budget to an equivalent of 1.11% of EU's 27 GNI. We hope that Member States will support this approach, which is a minimum to fund our joint European actions. As Sweden, for example, has long called for, we have put forward programmes that are modern, flexible and focused. And we are investing where there is the greatest potential for our future. Funding for research and innovation will be increased by 50% to reach €100 billion. A new Digital Europe programme worth €9 billion will support Europe's digital transformation and create new opportunities for Swedish tech companies to flourish, like Spotify or Klarna. And as I mentioned, we will ensure that 25% of the budget will support our climate and sustainable development targets. There is no greater return on investment than a clean planet for future generations. Dear Prime Minister, honourable members, it is only by working together to make our union stronger that we can collectively tackle the issues which individually we never could. The last 25 years of Swedish membership of the European Union should be our template. It shows that a stronger, more sovereign Europe means a stronger, more sovereign Sweden. And it shows the virtues of showing true responsibility and solidarity. As we look to our future, this should inspire us to help us to find the balance, the lagom, that we need in our union. Thank you very much.